It's dramatic, right? Because it's trying to get an emotional response out of you. 39% of Americans are regularly skipping meals. Millions are selling their blood plasma in order to survive, and more than half our renters can't afford the rent. But to our congressional elite, the larger national security issue is TikTok. Here's the thing. I think the TikTok ban, bullshit. I agree with the overall message that people are focusing on the wrong thing. On board. If you believe it's true, it's because it aligns with the view that you have of the world. So you see them yeah, that sounds right. I am outraged. But let me tell you what this actually says. So what Marianne Williamson is sharing is that 39% of these 1,000 Americans surveyed by a real estate company are regular skipping meals. Millions are selling their blood plasma, maybe, as they have been for many years, but we're not really sure it's millions because it's a really great unregulated industry, so we don't know. And more than half our renters are spending a very large chunk of their income on rent. Now, when I put it that way, that's not as interesting, right? That's not as shocking. That's so much context that gosh, you just sucked the fun right out of that Instagram post. But you know what it is? It's accurate. It's full context. I am not a Marianne Williamson hater. I've been following her for years before she got into politics. But I am a hater on not citing your sources and not accurately reporting data and stats. Messaging like this, in my opinion, is totally effing irresponsible. Do you see a source for any of that data that she just shared? No, you don't. I agree with the message. I think the TikTok ban is BS. I think there are much more important things that people should focus on. I think income and money is a huge problem. I am currently struggling with my small business and rent and eating and all of those things. I agree, and I don't want you sharing BS stats taken out of context to make your frickin' point. But let's dig in. Is it really true? Let's start at the top. Are 39% of Americans skipping meals? Here's the article. It's on Yahoo. What's the full stat? 39% have skipped meals to afford housing payments. Where did it come from? An April survey by Clever Real Estate. Lord, these real estate people who do all these surveys, please say they have researchers on their staff. I click the link, I go to their little website, and you scroll and you scroll and you scroll, and you just see stat on stat on stat on stat. Then at the bottom, we get to the real deets. The proprietary data featured in this study comes from an online survey commissioned by Clever Real Estate. 1,000 Americans were surveyed February 22nd to 23rd, 2023. So this stat, about 39% of people skipping meals to pay their housing costs, came from 1,000 Americans surveyed by a real estate agent company. Is there any additional information given about these 1,000 Americans? Is it a nationally representative sample, which would actually need to be further defined, but is it? We don't know. We don't know. Who took this survey? How did they get these people to take this survey? We don't know. So from a pure research data integrity standpoint, do I buy that 39% of Americans are skipping their meal to make housing payments? No. I believe 39% of these 1,000 Americans that you surveyed that we know nothing else about answered in that way. Is that interesting? Sure. Is that useful? Maybe. We don't know enough about the sample, about these 1,000 Americans to decide if it's useful or not. So should not have been on that Instagram post. Let's move on to the next one. Millions are selling their plasma. This is about a book that was published called Blood Money. I'm reading it on La List. I don't know. I got the best SEO. It's what came up first for me. Now, the article about this book on selling blood plasma does say millions of Americans sell their blood plasma every year. A few interesting notes. Every year. It's not oh my gosh, all of a sudden millions are selling their plasma. It's every year. The way this is being described in this article is it's common. It's been happening for a while. Perhaps not something you would put on a little Instagram image to describe the dire circumstances today. But it gets even a little more complicated. Because this article also on this huge industry of donating blood plasma is from 2014. 10 years ago. It was a big deal 10 years ago too. So it's been a problem for a while. Not that it makes it unimportant, just it's not new, old problem, right? And then I find this other article in the Jacobin, don't know what it is, don't think I'm saying it right, but it's an interview with the author of the Blood Money book, right? The book that they're writing up is millions of people donate blood plasma. And in this, the author of the book says the companies are quiet about how many people are selling plasma and about how much money they're making. Which just makes me wonder, so how do we know a million people are doing it? If people are being quiet about it, how do we know millions of people are doing it? Would be nice to include that information here. So just another stat, like Marianne Williamson. Maybe don't share that broadly with your audience. without further details. And to round it out with the last stat, more than half our renters can't pay rent. There's an article about it on CNN. And I will say I feel this deeply. Rent stresses me out every month. I see that stat and I'm like, oh, at least I'm not alone. Seems true. Another article, NPR, housing is now unaffordable for a record half of all U.S. renters. Study finds. I love it when I see one that says study finds because I just really hope I'm going to get a link to the study. And we do, because the Joint Center for Housing Studies of Harvard University released an actual report. And in that report is where people are getting this 50% stat. And what the stat is in the report is that the share of cost-burdened renters rose to 50%. So if you're like me, you're wondering, what does it mean to be a cost-burdened renter? Is that the same as not being able to afford your rent? Because I hear not being able to afford rent, I'm thinking I'm missing a rent payment, right? If I can't afford rent, I'm not giving you money for rent because I can't afford it. That's not what cost burden means. Cost burden, there were degrees of cost burden in this study, and it was spending 30 to 50% of your income on rent and utilities, for example. So it's not that you can't afford your rent, it's that you can afford your rent, but it's taking up a very large chunk of your income. You know what builds trust? Honesty, transparency, giving people full context.